I want to thank you for watching another segment of the Jermaine Brown Sports Talk Show. Today is Friday, February the 7th, 2014. Oh boy, what an interesting week. I want to really go back to that Super Bowl and really the entire NFL season, but particularly the Super Bowl. Now, Seattle obviously blew out Denver, and there was talk of, was this a surprising margin of victory? Should it have been? Well, if we went back throughout the history of this season, the results on Sunday should not have been surprising. I went back and I took a look at the numbers that traditional, I don't like that term pocket passer because to me, all quarterbacks in the NFL to be successful must be able to throw from the pocket, okay? You must be able to throw from the pocket. Whether you're a mobile quarterback or a stationary quarterback, or what we call stationary/traditional. I just prefer to call it stationary/traditional. So if I say traditional, you know what I'm referring to. Stationary quarterbacks. Traditional quarterbacks are Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, to some extent Drew Brees, those type of quarterbacks. Mobile quarterbacks, the RG3s, the Russell Wilsons, the Andrew Lucks, the Cam Newtons, those type of quarterbacks. Okay? And when you looked at the Final Four of this year's postseason, you had Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. You had Colin Kaepernick and Russell Wilson. Okay? So you had, it really set up very interesting. Because to me, I think this year's postseason, particularly the Super Bowl, put to bed this whole debate topic of, first of all, can you win with the black quarterback, mobile quarterback? That's now put to rest. You can no longer say you can't win with a mobile quarterback because Russell Wilson proved that you just can. Also, here's another thing. It put to rest about, can a dynamic offense or a team that is offensively dominant control or beat a team that is defensively dominated? Let's take a look at Seattle this year. Here's why I said the game on Sunday should not have been surprising if we paid attention to what was taking place this season. The results was actually predictable. Here's why I say that. Seattle versus traditional pocket quarterbacks, okay? And when I'm talking about non-rookies, we're going to take rookies out of the equation, and I'm also going to take really poor teams that really had no chance of winning or just poorly constructed, poorly built. I took them out the equation too because it's not a fair fight. Not a fair comparison. So I eliminated those teams. Here are the teams and the quarterbacks that Seattle went up against. Some a little better than others, but the reality is these were teams that were expected to do something or compete or whatever. And I also took into account all the teams in their division because you have to look at it that way. Seattle versus Houston. Okay? This is when Houston, at the time when Seattle played Houston was expected to actually do something. Matter of fact, this is the game that really caused Houston's demise. They never really recovered after this game. But at the time, Houston was supposed to be a viable playoff contender. Okay? Matt Sharp was the quarterback for Houston, and Seattle beat them 23-20. Now, what made this game interesting is because Houston would have won the game had they just simply kept running the ball. The reason they lost this game is because they put the ball in Matt Sharp's hand, and Matt Sharp turned the ball over a couple of times, especially that god-awful interception with about 2 minutes and some change to go to Richard Sherman, and that was the game. But here was Matt Sharp's numbers. 31 of 49, 355 yards. That's not bad. 7.2 average. Not bad. But here is where it was bad. 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Notice that I said 2 interceptions because the 2 was late in the game. One was the worst interception you could throw. That was the game. That was the interception that sealed the game. So even though his stat wise he was okay, he did not play well because he basically cost them the game. Now I think that was more bad coaching, but that's neither here nor there. Then Seattle played Arizona. Okay? Arizona with Carson Palmer. Now, Carson Palmer is no longer an elite level quarterback or top flight quarterback, but he still is serviceable. They beat Arizona 34-22. Carson Palmer's numbers was 30 of 45, 258 yards passing, 5.7 yards per average. It's not really that good. 1 touchdown, but key, 2 interceptions. Seattle versus St. Louis. This is when Sam Bradford, their starting quarterback, was out, so they had Kelly Clemens. They beat St. Louis 14-9. Now, notice Arizona and St. Louis both have top-notch defenses, particularly Arizona. This is why the games were close, 14-9. Okay, Kelly Clemens was 15 of 31 for 158 yards, 5.1 yards average, 0 touchdowns, 2 INTs. Notice a pattern here. Constantly getting 2 INTs. Seattle getting turnovers. Seattle beat Atlanta. Okay, with Matt Ryan, 33-10. Okay, Matt Ryan was 23 of 36, 172 yards for 4.8 yards average. 1 touchdown, 0 interception, but paltry numbers. I mean, 36 times you threw the ball and you only got 172 yards passing, paltry numbers. And yet these are all pocket passes that I'm mentioning here. But here's where it gets better. Seattle versus New Orleans. Okay? New Orleans have a Hall of Fame quarterback in Drew Brees. Drew Brees always puts up numbers against everyone, right? Well, Seattle beat New Orleans 34-7. Drew Brees was 23 of 38 for 147 yards. 3.9 average. 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions. Now, some people will say, well, Jermaine, that's not fair because Seattle was at home. That's not the point. The point is when they went up against traditional pocket quarterbacks or elite traditional pocket quarterbacks, this is what they did to them. Okay? How about the New York Giants? Seattle went up against the New York Giants. Okay? Two-time world champions, Eli Manning. Okay? They beat the Giants 23-0. Manning was 18 of 31, 156 yards passing, 5 yards per average, 0 touchdowns, 5 INTs. Now, what made this game particularly stand out is I remember a Seattle player, and I don't remember who it was, but a Seattle player in the hallway or the walkway to the field, he said to the fellas, look around, fellas, guys, because we're coming back here, which means we're coming back here for the Super Bowl. I enjoyed that. And then they went out and they kicked the Giants' butt. I mean, had Eli Manning, Manning turned the ball over 5 times. Okay? Then Seattle played Arizona again. This time Arizona bested Seattle 17-10 with Carson Palmer. But look at these numbers. 13 of 25, 178 yards passing, 7.1 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions. Now you say, wow, with stats like that, how did Arizona win the game? It's because their defense is a top-ranked defense. They have a top 5, top 10 defense. So they was able to equally shut down Seattle's offense. This is how Arizona was able to win that game. But look at what I want you to see is the numbers that these quarterbacks are putting up, these pocket quarterbacks. Okay? And then in the postseason, okay, in the playoffs, you have Seattle versus New Orleans again with Drew Brees, which means Brees had a chance to make up for what happened in the first game. And the outcome was still the same, 23-15. Not as big of a blowout. They were a little bit more competitive the second time, but the results were still the same. Okay, Brees was 24 of 43 for 309 yards, 7.2 yards per attempt average, 1 touchdown, 0 INTs. Those are not really great numbers because when you throw the ball for 43 times, you should be having more than 309 yards. Okay? But this was the stats of the traditional quarterbacks going into that Super Bowl. So as you see, they did a pretty effective job defensively of shutting down the other team's offense. Some of them had a top-tier offense going into that game. Houston, New Orleans, okay? Atlanta, supposedly had a top-tier offense. Let me see. The Giants, well, they struggled all year long, so I can't say that. And then, in that Super Bowl, Seattle beat Denver 43-8 with Peyton Manning, who was 34 of 49 for 280 yards, 5.7 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Okay? So, again, against traditional pocket quarterbacks, non-rookies, and taking out the real bad teams that really had no shot anyway going into it, versus Seattle, here's their stats. 1 win, the traditional pocket quarterback, 1 win, 8 losses, they threw 8 touchdowns, and they had 17 INTs. Now, I wanted to take a little look and say, well, because Seattle had the top-ranked defense. You know who had the second-ranked defense in the league? San Francisco. Notice that the real Super Bowl took place in the NFC Championship game, which was Seattle versus San Francisco. So I wanted to see how the second-best ranked defensive team did against traditional pocket quarterbacks. Here's how San Francisco fared versus against traditional pocket quarterbacks, non-rookies, and also eliminating the teams that just, they really had no shot going into the season, okay? San Francisco played St. Louis when they had Sam Bradford, and they beat St. Louis 35-11. Here were Sam Bradford's numbers. 19 of 41, 202 yards passing, 4.9 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. San Francisco versus Houston. Okay, when they had Matt Schaub, they beat them 34-3. Houston 34-3. 19 attempts. 19 of 35, 173 yards, 4.9 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 3 INTs. San Francisco beat versus Arizona when they, Carson Palmer. They beat them 32-20. Carson Palmer numbers was 25 of 41, 298 yards, 7.3 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 2 INTs. New Orleans versus San Francisco, or San Francisco versus New Orleans. Now, New Orleans won this game, 23-20, but they had a little help from the officiating. Because if the officiating didn't call that bogus roughing the passer penalty, San Francisco would have won that game. But that's neither here nor there. But here was Drew Brees' numbers. 30 of 43, 305 yards passing, 7.1 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 INT, which is so bad. But when you throw the ball 43 times, you should average a little bit more than 305 yards. But it's not so bad. Okay, San Francisco versus St. Louis. When they didn't have Sam Bradford, they had Kelly Clemens. They beat St. Louis 23-13, 19 of 37, 218 yards, 5.9, one touchdown, one interception. San Francisco versus Atlanta. Now, at this time, Atlanta was really, but they were still playing hard, but they were going nowhere. The season was really over for Atlanta. And here was the numbers. They beat Atlanta 34-24. Matt Ryan, 37-48 for 348 yards, which means he actually had a good game. 7.3 yards per attempt. But here's the key: 2 touchdowns, two INTs. And the INTs is what sealed the game, or what blew the game open for San Francisco. Okay, San Francisco versus Arizona. 23-20, they beat Arizona. Carson Palmer, 28 of 49, 407 yards passing, which means he had a really good game. 8.3 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 1 INT. So, against the traditional pocket quarterbacks, non-rookies and taking out the really bad teams that had no shot going into the season versus San Francisco, here's how they fared. 1 win, 6 losses, 9 touchdowns, 11 INTs. Notice that's very similar to Seattle's 1 win, 8 losses, 8 touchdowns, and 17 INTs. So notice what the 2 top defenses was able to do against your traditional pocket quarterbacks. This is why I said what they did against Denver should not have been a surprise. Now, Seattle and San Francisco didn't have an easy time of it because in actuality, they struggled against mobile quarterbacks, or what we call the dual threat quarterbacks. Those were the quarterbacks who gave Seattle and San Francisco some issues. Let's take a look at the stats. Seattle versus mobile quarterbacks, non-rookies. Also taking out the really bad teams that, they going into the season like it was a joke. Seattle beats Carolina. They played Carolina, and they beat Carolina 12-7. Cam Newton, 16 of 23, 125 yards passing, 5.4 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 0 INTs. Okay? Now, you look at those stats and you say, well, those are lousy stats. But what he made it up for was in the rushing attempts and the running. Indianapolis, and not only that, Carolina has a top-tier defense. I think they would like the 3rd-ranked defense in the league. So notice Seattle, San Francisco, and Carolina, the 3 best defensive teams in the league this year. Indianapolis versus Seattle. Seattle versus Indianapolis. Now, Indianapolis beats Seattle 34-24. Andrew Luck, 16 of 29 for 229, 7.9 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 0 INTs. Okay? Seattle versus San Francisco. Seattle beat San Francisco 29-3. Colin Kaepernick, 13 of 28, 127 yards per attempt. 127 yards, 4.5 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. They got him that first game there in Seattle. Seattle versus San Francisco in San Francisco. San Francisco beat Seattle 19-17. Colin Kaepernick, 15 of 29, 175, 6 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 INT. Okay? Seattle versus San Francisco in the NFC Championship game. Seattle beat San Francisco 23-17. Colin Kaepernick, 14 of 24, 153, 6.4 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 2 INTs. That was a game that San Francisco, quite frankly, should have won and could have won. But look at those stats. Those are pedestrian stats. So how did San Francisco put themselves in position to win that game? With Colin Kaepernick's legs, obviously. So here was the mobile quarterbacks, non-rookies and taking out the really bad teams versus Seattle. Here's how they fared. 2 wins, 3 losses, 5 touchdowns, 6 INTs. How about San Francisco versus mobile quarterbacks? Non-rookies taking out the really crappy teams from the beginning. San Francisco, they had no shot before the season even started. San Francisco versus Green Bay. San Francisco beats Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, 34-28. Kaepernick's numbers, Aaron Rodgers' numbers, was 21 of 37, 333 yards passing, 9 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, 1 INT. Pretty good numbers. Okay? Seattle versus San Francisco versus Seattle. Seattle beats San Francisco 29-3. Okay, Russell Wilson, 8 of 19, 142 yards, 7.5 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Not great stats, but what they made it up was in their running game. San Francisco versus Indianapolis. Indianapolis beat San Francisco. Now notice, Indianapolis beat both San Francisco and Seattle. What does Indianapolis have? A mobile quarterback, Andrew Luck. This was how they was able to do it. But look, here's Andrew Luck's passing number. So you can't say Andrew Luck did it through the air. Andrew Luck, 17 of 26, 159 yards, 6.1 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. So it wasn't like he beat him through the air. San Francisco versus Carolina. Carolina beat San Francisco 10-9. Cam Newton, 16 of 32, 169 yards, 5.3 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 1 INT. San Francisco versus Washington. They beat Washington 27-6. RG3, or Robert Griffin III, 16 of 28, 118 yards, 4.5 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 1 INT. San Francisco versus Seattle. They beat Seattle 19-17. Russell Wilson, 15 of 25, 199 yards, 8 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 INT. San Francisco versus Green Bay. San Francisco beats Green Bay. And this was the playoff game. 23-20. Aaron Rodgers, 17 of 26, 177 yards, 6.8 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 0 INT. Okay? This was in a frigid, cold game where Green Bay was at home, and San Francisco was able to still go in there and beat them. And we all know how they was able to do that. Those legs of Kaepernick. But notice that the mobile quarterbacks gave San Francisco some problems too. San Francisco beat Carolina in the divisional round. Okay, 23-10. Cam Newton, 16 of 25, 267 yards, which is pretty good, 10.7 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 2 INTs. Seattle beat San Francisco in the NFC Championship game 23-17. Russell Wilson, 16 of 25, 215 yards, 8.6 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 0 INTs. So here was the mobile quarterback's numbers versus San Francisco. 4 wins, 5 losses, 8 touchdowns, 7 INTs. So why did I quote those stats? It's to show you that if you looked at it, the mobile quarterbacks gave Seattle and San Francisco more problems than the more traditional pocket quarterback, the more traditional quarterback. Oh, excuse me. They gave them more problems. So if I am building a team, I have to look at if I need a quarterback, and I have to choose between the traditional quarterback or the mobile quarterback. All things being equal, you got to give me that mobile quarterback for this reason. Because, see, with the mobile quarterback, it makes it much easier to slow down those pass rushes of these elite level defenses. Seattle, San Francisco, Carolina, Arizona. It makes it much easier to slow down their pass rush. Because why? You have to account for that quarterback using his legs. This is why teams like Green Bay, okay, Teams like Carolina, Washington, Seattle, San Francisco. These are teams that's going to probably be able to do well over the next few years, because if that quarterback smartly uses his legs, he can be just as effective as if he was throwing the football. Okay? And you cannot say you can't win that way anymore, because Seattle proved you can win that way. So when I look at it, I have to say the mobile quarterbacks is definitely the way to go. Now, when we come back, I'm gonna give a little prescription to those to Denver. Forget the other team. I'm gonna talk about Denver, who was the runner-up in this year's Super Bowl. I'm gonna give them a little prescription, a little RX as they call it, that could help them next year, maybe even get over that little hump and actually win the Super Bowl. Welcome back again to the Jermaine Brown Sports Talk Show. Today is Friday, February the 7th, 2014. Now, I want to get to the Denver Broncos. I was hearing Tony Dungy the other day, and he was talking about Peyton Manning. And he says Peyton Manning, off that loss in a couple of weeks, he'll come back with that yellow notepad with about 8 things he feels that he can improve upon, and even the team can improve upon, to try to win. But here's what I'm going to say about that, with all due respect to Peyton Manning. If Peyton Manning understood what it took to win, he would actually have more victories. Because a lot of times, he's had pretty good teams. But here's why Denver did not have a shot on Sunday against that Seattle defense. And if you had looked at it throughout the season, and this has really been Peyton Manning's problem from whether he was in Indianapolis and his time in Denver. It's the same problem. The team is too much reliant on Peyton Manning, which means it's all about Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning has to play well for the team to win. That's a problem. Because if he has to play well for the team to win, if he doesn't play well, then that means they won't win. So if I am a defense, now I know if I can slow down and stop Peyton Manning, we got the game. Here is what Denver needs to be able to do. There's a couple of things. If I'm John Elway, here's how I fix this team. I'm going to sit down with Peyton Manning. Why Peyton Manning? Because he's basically the head coach on the field. It makes no sense to sit down with John Fox, because let's make it real simple. Peyton Manning is really running things. Okay? This is why I'm going to sit down with Peyton Manning in particular. And I'm going to say to Peyton, listen, Peyton, if you want to be more successful in this postseason, you have to understand what it takes to win in the postseason. You want to know why New England was able to play you guys was able to get to the AFC Championship game? And you look at New England. New England is not a very good team. Where outside of Brady, really, where is their talent? And Aqib Talib. Outside of those two, where was really their talent? Come on. Well, name the talent outside them two. They weren't really a good team, but here was how they were able to get to the AFC Championship game. This year, more than in recent years, they became a more balanced attack team, which means they throw the ball about 25 times, they rush the ball about 20 to 25 times. Balance. Balance. Seattle, balance. San Francisco, balance. Denver, not real balance. You threw the ball about 45 times and you rushed the ball about 16 to 18 times a game. Not good enough. This is why I'm saying to Peyton Manning, and I'm going to pretend you're Manning. Here's what I got to say. Listen, Manning, if you want to really win, if you really want your greatness to shine, you're going to have to cut down your number of attempts, passing attempts per game. And John, as being John Elway, I'm telling you from experience, because when I was playing the game and I was throwing the ball 35, 40 times a game, I was also losing in these postseason, losing in the Super Bowls. And a lot of these Super Bowls, in a couple of Super Bowls, we got blown out. But when we got Terrell Davis and we became more of a power running team, okay, that balance is what allowed me, and our defense got stronger because of it. Because when you're able to effectively run the ball, guess what? Your defense don't spend so much time out in the field. So that keeps them fresher as the game goes along. So because we had a power running team, that allowed us to have more balance, which made us a much better team. Now, I know we ran the ball more this year than you did in years past or last year, but you're not running it enough. The running game has been more of a complementary thing with you, and it can no longer be that way. It has to be something that you have to be really truly committed to, which means we got to be willing and able to run the ball in the first quarter. Now, you might not get many yards early in the game, but look at Seattle. Even if they're getting stuffed early in the game, because their defense is good, the defense is keeping the game close, but eventually, Marshawn Lynch is going to break it. Boom. You keep hitting it enough, you'll break it. Okay? It's just like with a sledgehammer. It takes time to get through. You're not going to get through on just one hit. But you keep hitting it and keep hitting it. Eventually, you break through. But you have to be willing to stay committed to it. Look at the teams that had the most success this year. They've all stayed committed to the run. They use the run not as just a complimentary thing, but as a real force, a real weapon. And if you're going to be successful, you have to do that. Look at the last two world champions. The last two world champions did not have dynamic passing attacks. Matter of fact, they were in the bottom of the league when it came to passing attacks. But they were very efficient with the passing. See, that's the key thing. They were efficient when they threw the ball, which means they made plays. The quarterback made plays when it needed to be made, but they relied a lot on the run game. This is where we need to be at if we want to win, which means we got to get you, instead of throwing that ball about 40, 45 times a game, get you throwing it about 30 to 35 times a game. That 10 times a game difference will add up, and put it to that running game, that will make a much bigger difference. And then what I got to do is I got to put more speed and get younger on that defense. We cannot have Champ Bailey as our main cornerback. He's too old. And now he's talking about moving to safety. I don't know if he has the quickness to keep up anymore. So to me, we got to get younger on that defense, particularly on the back end, because our front end is actually pretty good. We got pretty good pass rushers. We got pretty good run stoppers. But what we're lacking is really on the back end. Because the tackling against Seattle was atrocious. That was on the back end. The front end, we did a great job stopping Marshawn Lynch. We did a great job even containing somewhat to some degree Russell Wilson. But when Russell hit them passes, they were breaking tackles. From an offensive standpoint, that was a big difference for them. So we got to fix the back end of that defense. So we got to get more quicker on that and get better defenders on the back end. But what I need you to do, Peyton, is I need you to commit more to the running game, more to the power running game. Because let's be honest, you're getting up there in age. You're getting up there in years. You are throwing more ducks than in years past. You don't have the same arm strength you used to have. So therefore, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. We got to be more efficient. Now, we led the team in passing, but it did not help us against a team like Seattle, where more of a smash mouth ground and pound in this case, just turn around and be able to hand that ball off might have served us a little better. It's not to say we would have won the game, but we might be able to keep it closer. So if we're able to effectively do this, let's get another shot at Seattle, the San Franciscos, and let's see how we measure up. I think we'll be a lot better off for it. I want to thank you for watching another segment of the Jermaine Brown Sports Talk Show. I wish you, each and every one of you, an excellent weekend. See you next week. Take care.